Hey, this is Robert here at Goozy Fabrication. Got a great video for my DIY guys and gals working on your projects at home. Okay, this week's video is a subject that is always overlooked. I never really see much about it on YouTube. Everybody's focused on the body, paint, metalwork. Well, hey, what about the chassis, suspension, and frame? That's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you how to check the frame for squareness to make sure it's straight. Then we're going to straighten a bent frame rail. Going to give you some disassembly tips, powder coat, reassemble the suspension, tips and tricks. We're going to be fixing all of this in this video. Hey, if you like what we're doing, coffee.com, help support the channel. First up, before we do any work to the frame, we want to make sure that it is straight and square. And there's several different ways, but this is a very quick way. I think it'll help some of you guys out. And what this is called the next dimension. Now, this is the actual end of the frame. Past that is called the frame horn. That's where your front bumper bolts onto. Now, this is the rear of the frame. And I'm calling it that because everything to this point is boxed. So that's your strength. Everything past the point where we just fixed, that's the end of the frame. And that can be bent easily. So you don't want to take a measurement from those areas. You always want to take it as close as you can to the end of the frame. And you need to find a reference point that is the same on both sides. And then also the same on both sides at the front of the frame. Okay, now we don't want to use that because that is a body mount bolt or mount. So what we want to do, yeah, you have to excuse me, man. Allergies in Texas, they've been kicking my butt all week. I can barely say my own name. Okay, so we want to find a point in the front. Well, that's not a very good point. You can use whatever point that you desire. I'm just showing you points that I'm going to use for this video. And it's like I said, this is like a first step measurement. There are other measurements to determine if a frame is square. This is just one, and this is the simplest. So I'm going to use that hole, and that is the shock mount hole. So that's going to be the same on both sides. What we want to do, now this is a tip. This chisel will go all the way through the frame completely. And because frames are irregular, it's not just a straight linear shot. We're going to be running a tape measure. So this chisel through the frame, I can raise or lower, and that is going to give me a straight shot with the tape measure to the very front. Now we don't want to have a lot of wiggle room in that chisel or whatever you're using to go through the hole, and that chisel matches that hole really well. So that'll be a good reference point, and it's the same on the other side. And this is basically what we're doing. We're taking two measurements diagonally, and that's called the next dimension. Now you can see I have my chisel set. Get above that hump there in the frame, because we need a nice straight line. Take a measurement, and you want the tape measure to be taut. Okay, we'll get our measurement. And I'm taking a measurement from two different points just for redundancy. And we want to write those down.
That's the first measurement, and now the second measurement. And basically we want to repeat it on the opposite side. Now frames, this is something you have to keep in mind. Okay, this particular frame is the 1963, which means it was made in 1962. So all of that age and all of that wear and tear, and especially being a convertible, all of these years, you're probably not going to get an exact measurement on both sides. So that's not to worry. What you want to look for, if you're over a quarter of an inch out, say you take a measurement from one direction and then the other direction, and there's a discrepancy of more than a quarter of an inch. When you get up into the half-inch range, yeah, that's way out. You've got an issue. The frame is either diamond or twisted. Something's going on. You need to check out further. Now, this particular frame is an eighth of an inch difference from one side to the other. That's totally acceptable.
And hey, with the age of these vehicles, repairing the frame or finding frame damage is pretty common. We're going to start with this frame rail. See the obvious damage? Well, I'm going to show you how to repair that fast and easy.
And there's kind of see when you have a guide against it, see how much it's bent. Well, let's take care of that. Okay, so how we're going to do this, we're going to use oxygen and acetylene. So I'm hooking up the regulators. Now, for those of you who may not be real familiar with oxygen and acetylene, I'll give you a quick background. Now, the oxygen and acetylene comes with different tips, interchangeable tips. Now, this is a cutting torch tip. And this is a brazing tip for welding. And what we're going to be using is called a rosebud or a heating tip. That'll put out a lot of flame. You'll see in a second. Okay, and the tips interchange really easily. And we're getting that rosebud on. And we always want to just hand tighten that. We don't want to use a wrench or anything like that. Okay, now I'm going to use this jack stand and this piece of square stock kind of as an anvil. And then we're going to cinch this down, try to squeeze it as much as we can so when we start to heat this area, things will pull down really easily. Now, one thing about metal straightening is if you're using a hammer and you hit unsupported metal, it's going to distort the metal, cause a lot of damage. You're not really going to do what you intend to do unless there's some type of anvil underneath. And that's basically what we're doing here, using that piece as an anvil. So now we're going to get some heat on this. And when you heat steel, it makes it really malleable and we can move it around easily. And it doesn't take a lot. And you always want to put the heat in the correct spot. Now this is a dolly with a handle on it pretty much. We use that a lot in the collision and bodyworking industry. And it's not a one-shot deal. Okay, so you don't want to try to do all of the work in one or two massive hits. We want to work the metal back into shape. The metal has kind of a memory. It wants to go back into the shape that it was formed. So what we want to do is to try to help it go back on its own. And now I've switched tools. This is actually a fender hammer. And all of these tools have a lot of different names, so if you call it something else, well, that's fine too. And you can see little by little, we're getting it worked back into shape. And flattening it off. Now you can really see what I'm talking about, using that piece as an anvil. Okay, there's a little bulge on the back side yet. We're going to just flatten that out. Now that we have our shape back, flattening out that back piece is going to be really easy. And we'll start with the highest point. We don't want to heat a super large area and cause a bunch of distortion. So we will take care of this area, and this will kind of retain the shape of that hole. If we heated a lot of that area, well, that's going to crush that hole and it's going to oblong. And now we're going to work on that little 90-degree bend there. Bring back a little bit of crispness to it. And we use the rosebud tip because that heats up a large area pretty quickly. And you'll notice I'm not wailing away. You don't want to wail away on the metal. You want to push the metal to where you want it to go. And again, you've seen how many steps I've used to get the metal or the shape back into this section of frame. And we're getting close. That top rail back into shape. I think this will be the last heat.
Tell me when that starts getting red.
And now we can work on that last high spot, or the last little bulge there. And whenever you're heating up the metal, you want to be quick, because when it starts to cool down, well, then it starts to lose its, let's say, elasticity. When it's hot, you can work it really easily. You don't have to use a lot of force. The colder it gets, well, the more force you have to use. Okay. That's it. I think that's good enough. Now the other little indentation there, that's a factory. It's on both sides. We'll check for. And here we go. Front suspension disassembly. And getting the gearbox out of the way. And we'll work on the upper control arms. Now, what we've got scheduled, like I mentioned, we're going to be repairing whatever needs to be repaired on the frame. Then it's going to go out to media blast, powder coat. We're going to be disassembling all of these suspension parts, sending them out also for media blast and powder coat. And we'll get that rear suspension disassembled and removed. Here is the pile of suspension parts that have been removed. So now we're going to go ahead and further disassemble the suspension parts. And we're going to be using an air hammer to get those bushings out of there. Yeah, now we're at the beginning of this restoration. Hey, stay tuned. We're going to be installing the complete floor, upper deck, trunk pan, left and right quarter panels, replacing the deck, replacing the front hood, front fenders, and we even have new doors for this convertible. It's going to be a very in-depth, extensive restoration. Now here's a restoration tip for you. This is the easy way, or the old school way, on how to remove the inner wheel bearing and grease seal, or the easy way. Let me just put it that way. We're going to get the spindle nut off of here. Now, usually it's not tight, so it's okay to use some adjustable end pliers. Not going to damage the nut. Now, there's a trick to this. We're going to get this nut off of here, then remove the outer wheel bearing and washer. And the trick is you reinstall this nut. Yeah, I could have sped that up a little bit, but yeah, here it comes off. And the trick is you reinstall the nut and you have to cock the hub assembly where when you pull up quickly, it catches the bearing. I'll show you here in a second. Okay, and you can see that cleanly pulls out the inner wheel bearing and the grease seal. And a lot of times, some of that stuff is getting hard to find. If you don't damage it, you always have the option to reuse it if it's in good condition. And here is the frame back from media blasting. Now they've applied a low sheen or semi-gloss black finish on this. And it looks like it turned out pretty decent. Hey, and throughout this assembly process, I'm going to be sharing with you some tips and tricks on assembly. Okay, and here's the first tip. Now, these little threaded mounts, those are the lower control arm shaft where the bolt goes through the frame, and it makes life a lot easier if you have those in place. So first tip, don't lose those. Okay, I'll show you where they go. Those are the holes that are on the outside. Now that little guy goes on the inside. Otherwise, you have to get a wrench up in there and put a nut on it. Yeah, those make it easier. Okay, here's all of our parts that we're going to be installing laid out. And we're starting with good quality Moog replacement parts. No China there. Yeah, when you lay them out on the table, that's a lot of parts for the suspension.
And we took our time and refinished everything really nicely inside and out. Steering gear box refinished. A little bit of a contrasting cast color. Okay, in this piece, a little bit of time was taken and it was nicely refinished also. Some nice contrast. Okay, we don't want to use those old caps. We want to do the best job that we can do. And it's always in the little details. And here's the spindle with the backing plate mounted. You'll notice we did a flat, cleaned up the spindles, then I did a flat black inside, semi-gloss outside. And here's another tip for you. Okay, if you're replacing the bushings on your Impala, there is a hard top and a convertible replacement bushing kit. Don't buy the hard top if you have a convertible. There are more bushings on the convertible. Otherwise, you'd be buying two kits. And there those guys are. And we're going to go ahead and set those in place. And this is going to be another little tip that I do. I don't glue the mount into place because it needs to be able to move in the opening. But what I do recommend is a little bit of black weather strip adhesive on the washer. That keeps that thing from moving around when you're mounting the body, from slipping off. One important thing you want to do, make sure that it is centered before it dries. And always put that glue back in the box. Otherwise, it's going to get a hole in it one way or another. And here's something else you want to keep in mind. Whenever you have things powder coated, okay, we want the outside powder coated, but oftentimes they'll do the powder coat will extend and do parts that we don't want powder coated. Now the bushings have to be pressed in here. If there's powder coat, they won't press in. You'll have a lot of trouble. So we're just going to touch that up. We don't want to take off a lot of material, just enough to get that bushing in there. Here's another consideration to keep in mind. Okay, this is the lower control arm shaft. You'll notice that it is directional. It can be put in upside down. Don't want to do that. And then I always like to lay out the A-arms and then orient the cross shafts in them. There is a front and a back. Some of them have an up and a down. If we lay them out like that, it makes life a lot easier. Okay, back to the powder coating. Okay, you'll notice that they didn't get any powder coat in that opening or that hole. So what we want to do is come back, put a little bit of fingernail polish or whatever type of paint you choose in there. Otherwise, rust is going to take off in there. It's going to bleed out. It's going to make everything look really really not professional. Now these are specific bolts. I tried to upgrade all of the bolts and replace all of the bolts for the suspension, but these are specific. So we had to retain those. And back to the cross shafts. Long end, short end. Short end goes to the back, long goes to the front. This is the upper control arm shaft. Now I like to build the upper control arm on the vehicle. It's just easier. That way you don't put it in a vise, mar it up. And I'll show you how I do that. Okay, we take a little bit of grease, coat the shafts. Now this is where the bushings are going to install. And we're getting ready to install the bushings. Okay, we coat a little bit of grease inside the bushing as well as the outside. And we'll do that to both of the bushings. Okay, so carefully slide that upper control arm into place. Set the bushings. And now another tip. This is a good time to not forget to put the rubber snubber in place. Because after it's assembled, yeah, you can't put it in place. So let's do that right now. Bump stop. Whatever part of the country you're from, you can call it whatever you want. Okay, we're going to get these bushings installed the easy way. Okay, we'll tighten that down. Now you can see the little bit of deformation there. Now that's what we want. That's perfectly fine. We want some pressure on that bushing control arm because now a gentle tap, boom, there it is. And we want to check it, make sure there's no binding. Now we can install the ball joint. Get that set into place. We don't want to forget our seal. And we're putting in that threaded mount, installing the lower control arms. Okay, lower ball joint. We don't want to use an impact on that. We want to use a wrench. Okay, here's the fun part. Yeah, I really dislike handling compressed springs. Okay, but we've got that licked. And we always want to use a wrench, not an impact or anything like that, tightening up the ball joints. And now we're going to get ready for hub installation. Now I've already packed the bearings and installed the grease seal and the bearings inside the hub. I'm going to get that seated. And we don't want to over tighten. the wheel hub. I want to check it, make sure it spins freely. Cotter pin. We don't want to forget any of the cotter pins. And this is another trick or tip. An oversized socket works really well for not damaging the dust cap. Now, I don't really know what the owner wants to do, if he's going to go disc brakes or whatever. Not going to invest the time in putting in front brakes till I know. Get the front shock slid into place and secured. Yeah, again, I don't like to use impacts on a lot of things. Some things are okay. Most of the time I like to use a wrench so they don't get over tightened. Okay, we're going to assemble the inner and outer tie rods. And I came to find out later that they sent the wrong pieces in the suspension rebuild kit, so I'm going to have to order those. They're not going to get installed on this video. Sway bar. Okay, the frame bushings are installed. Now I'm installing the end links. And we want to make sure we don't over tighten those. Okay, gearbox installation. And you get that set into place. Yeah, the cast is a really nice contrast, along with the yellow zinc hardware and the black, semi-gloss black frame. And there's where I found out that that's the incorrect piece there. So we've got those on order. We'll deal with that later. Okay, rear suspension. Now, I did retain the original hardware. I refinished the original hardware for the rear because they're really specific. Had a hard time locating the correct replacement bolts. Now, here is a tip on compressing the rear spring so you can install the shocks and then that cross shaft. This way it won't damage it. Now, you cannot use this method on the front springs. Don't even try. And this is something worth investing in. One of the best tools I've ever bought. Grease guns are stupidly messy. This is the cleanest, easiest way to grease whatever needs to be greased. No more mess. And there it is. And we will go back and double check everything, double check all of the bolts, make sure they're tight, make sure all the cotter pins are installed, make sure everything is greased. And like I mentioned, we'll get those inner and outer tie rods installed when the correct pieces come in. Everything's looking really nice. Really happy. Got to get to work on the body, get that refinished. Stay tuned for part 8. Thanks to all our subscribers, supporters, and followers. We're at almost 7,000 subscribers. Really happy about that. Thank you guys for making that possible. Yeah, pretty happy with that. We'll see you in the next video.